The new channel. The new channel. Hashtag TNCNow.
The views, opinions, and insights expressed in the following shows are those of the host, producers, guests, and viewers. They do not necessarily reflect the position of the channel. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to the new channel. Our passion transforms a community that sees all things new. I'm Alpha Sanford and I'm streaming live from Boston, Massachusetts. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, mabuhay to all of you. Welcome to Once a Teacher, Always a Teacher, Season 2, Episode 3. Hello again and welcome to Once a Teacher, Always a Teacher. I'm your host, Alpha Sanford. All right, folks, I'm glad that you are joining today's episode because today's episode, I'm hopeful that it's going to be very inspiring to all of you. The reason why I say that is because a few years back, this is around 2013, 2014, a particular TED Talks by our guest today has really inspired me to the extent that in some of the equity classes that I delivered, I actually shared this TEDx talk to everyone in my class. And then since then, I've followed our special guest because of the amazing work that she has done in the public ed sector in the Philippines. So tonight, if you are a public school teacher in the Philippines, or if you're a public school teacher here in the US, please take down notes. I'm sure you will be inspired, or I hope that you will be inspired by the end of this show. Before I will bring her in, let me just greet the Philippines Happy Independence Day, right? It's June 11th here in the US, but in the Philippines it's June, wait a minute, I think it's June 12th in the Philippines. Anyway, June 12th is the Philippines Independence Day. So let me just greet all our kababayans, Happy Independence Day. All right. So let me introduce to you our guest today. Our guest today has been in the public school for 13 years. She's been teaching at the Kulyat Elementary School for 13 years. Recently, She was named as one of Metrobank Foundation's 10 most outstanding Filipino of the year 2021. And also, she was named as the 2022 the Outstanding Young Men Awardee in the Philippines. Our guest today, Miss Lu Sabrina Ongkiko, is also named as one of the outstanding women in the Philippines service for her dedication in educating children, empowering teachers, and also contributing reforms in the Philippines education system. So, without further ado, let me bring in Teacher Sab. Come on in, Teacher Sab.
Hi, Miss Alpha.
How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me here.
Yes,
And hello, good morning, good evening, everybody.
it's a pleasure to have you. Okay, so why don't we start with your story? Because I mentioned earlier to our viewers that way back in 2013, you had this amazing, at least in my opinion, one of the most amazing and inspiring TEDx talk for teachers or would-be educators. So, yeah, tell us about your story. I heard, or at least most people have heard your story. We heard that you gave up your path for med school and ended up being a public school teacher. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's actually that's right. I was supposed to pass my medical school application when I decided to change career paths and become a teacher. So I finished my major in biology at the Ateneo de Manila University back in 2005. I did a year of service after that. So I was a Jesuit volunteer for a year and was assigned to Iloilo and worked for, during that year, I worked for an NGO called, also a non-government organization called Pathways to Higher Education.
Mhm.
And that's actually very instrumental in my discernment, to choose to go into teaching instead. So when I came back from that year of volunteer work, I literally got a call. So when you say like I was called to teach, I really literally got a call from my mentor inviting me to attend a meeting with young professionals. And I was wondering why was I there? But she
Mhm.
was talking about like she wanted to recruit uh, science majors to become science teachers because she believes that's what our country needs. And that's really true. We're very poor. Like the Philippines are in the bottom in terms of science outcomes, right? So after that meeting, I was really bothered. Like I couldn't sleep. And I was wondering why this that was bothering me so much. So
Mhm.
I did a discernment, and my mentor. So I had a spiritual director before. Uh, he he advised me to look at three things. He was telling me like Sab, look at your passion. What is life giving for you? And then I realized, oh, life giving for me is when I'm in front of kids, when I'm doing volunteer work teaching them. Second,
Mhm.
what are you good at? What's your skill?
Mm.
So it should be life giving, and what's your skill? And then I realized that it was very natural for me to break down concepts and to really like I want to make sure that people learn. And then the third one is what's the need? What does the world need that you can contribute to? And I realized I can't turn my back on kids who are not in school,
Mm.
who can get a better future but are not getting that right to education. So he said the intersection of your passion, your skill, and your need is your vocation. And I realized after thinking about it that it wasn't medicine, but teaching. So I changed track. So that's the short of it. There's a longer story behind it, but that's the summary.
That's great. So, really, the call for you to serve in the public, and or at least the call for you to teach came through. That's amazing. Yeah, that's really amazing. What I love what you said is really about the intersection of um, your passion, your skill, and what are the needs that needs to be addressed. And I think in one of your most recent TEDx talks, I have not watched it, but you also talk about what was that about? Your talk to the senior students, looking or what do
Who
you
do you
want to
want to
be?
be?
Yeah, what
Yeah.
do you want to be? Right. So I think for people who may be at a fork in their lives and trying to figure out what they want to be, that's a great advice, right? That's a wonderful advice. So that's such an awesome path, reflecting in terms of what you want to be. And now you're a teacher. Why did you choose to teach at a public school?
Well, in college, I was doing volunteer work during summers. So we
Mm-hmm.
usually have summer classes. I would use like half of my summer time to teach public high school students. And and then I realized that there were a lot of challenges, a lot of gaps which we don't
Mm.
fully understand because we're not in that in that world. And I was wondering, if I'm going to be a teacher, where do I want to put my energy and skill? If I am to be better at this, where do I want to put all those things in?
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the demographics in the Philippines, almost 90% of our students are in the public school. So if we make the public school system better, that affects like majority, like 90% of your young population who would grow up and vote and make changes in society, make a difference. So if you want um to build the nation through education, then you go to the public school because that's what we need to improve on to improve our country. So that's what I believe.
That's great. So, talking about improving, the education, what are some of the things that you've been doing lately, aside from being a teacher at Kulyat, that is helping the country's public school system?
Um, well, this pandemic, I realized that uh, we the education sector shouldn't work alone and wouldn't be able to uh, produce or solve our own problems because the problems are really interconnected with one another. Like I realized that we need to work with the Department of Health. We need to work with doctors and health professionals moving forward because the context that was affected by health affected education. And so I'm working with doctors right now. So
Mm-hmm.
I've partnered for our school. I've partnered with developmental pediatricians and child psychologists because as teachers, we're not experts on mental health, but doctors would know what to do. And we have to have this discussion in partnership. So I've been working with that. So I give talks for doctors and the doctors give talks to and seminars for our parents and our teachers. So there's like that conversation happening. I also realized that we have to work with beyond our school and really work with the local government units, with the barangays. We have to think of creative ways to tap the resources that are around us. So what I really do is to network and partner and encourage other people to take part in education, even though you're not a teacher or not an educator per se. But if your skill is something that can benefit, the students. So I've partnered with individuals who are um, dance coaches because they provided dance club sessions for our students. So
Mm-hmm.
like virtual dance club sessions. I've partnered with public speakers to give trainings for our students with theater groups, etc. So I'm more like a manager now, working with other people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I certainly believe in terms of the power of the community and really providing these wraparound services to our students, especially after the pandemic. And I'm so glad to hear that you are doing that for your students. Yeah, that's really wonderful.
Thank you. And
Yeah,
I'd like to say um, I'm very grateful to all the people who's been helping our school,
yeah,
go through this pandemic. So thank you.
yeah. Speaking of your school, I read somewhere that all of your students love you. And it's almost an amazing result when all of your students say they love you because, they learn a lot from you and things like that. So I am curious, as a teacher, how do you connect and build relationships with your students?
Well, as a teacher, I think we always have to start from where they are.
Okay, yes,
um
meet where
you
they are,
have
right?
to, yeah, right, so
Mhm.
you have to know you, because you can't help them if you don't know where they are. If you
Yes.
assume that you know better and not like go down first to their where they are, then you couldn't pull them up.
Mhm.
They my students would know when a teacher cares, so you
Mm.
have to genuinely uh want to get to know them, so that you know how to like approach them, how to talk to them. My stance would always be I want to learn from my students as much as I want them to learn from me. Um,
Mhm.
but I think it's the teacher first. The teacher should reach out first and say, I want to learn from you. And then that's when the student opens up. So I remember like my favorite thing to do when I was during my first year of teaching was walking with my students going home. That's 30-minute walk because some of my students don't have like money for fares. So I'd
Right.
walk with them. And that's the best part of the day because during that moment, it's the students who are teaching me about their lives, and I'm the one taking notes. And
Mhm.
that really helped me a lot, like in terms of perspective, in terms of like the context they're in, because it's not a world that I'm used to. It's my world was different before I came into the public school. So it you have to really take the time to listen and learn from your students.
That's pretty good. In fact, based on what you had mentioned, teacher said, it reminded me of a conversation that I had with one of my colleagues with regards to curiosity, right? So there are some teachers where, the instinct to care is not quite there all the time, right? So the question is, how do you teach um, teachers whose natural tendency is not to like ask questions and things like that? And so the answer that I got was, learn to be curious, like see something that's different or may not be similar to your experience. And I thought you just confirmed that. That's pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty good. So for those viewers who are not quite familiar with the demographics of the classroom or the elementary school that you teach, can you describe to us what is it like?
So Kulyat Elementary School, it's such a small school. So
Mm-hmm.
our space was really very like crowded, but
Okay.
we have around 3,000 students. So
Okay.
the students are
3,000.
sharing classrooms. Like grade 5 would share classrooms with grade 6. So 6 in the morning, 5 in the afternoon, grade 5 in the afternoon. So it's like
Okay.
that. So it's very cramped, very crowded, and it's very diverse as well. So we have a lot of students from surrounding communities, poor communities.
Mm-hmm.
We have a Muslim community near us. So in terms of like faith and religion, it's very diverse as well. There's Christian, Muslims, Catholics, and then in terms of like economic status, it's also very diverse. We have students coming from the middle class, so C, D, and E
Mm.
classes. So
Okay. Tell
yeah,
us
so that's a
about those.
typical, yeah.
What's A, B, C classes?
So A is like the I mean more well off, A and B, but C is the
Okay.
middle class, and then D and E are more the struggling financially.
Yeah. So really, you have a diverse group of students, including, not just economically diverse, but also I heard you have Muslim students in your classroom, which is pretty amazing. So tell me, how do you include all of these different diverse learners in your class so that they're gonna feel welcome and things like that?
So it's well, I'd like to tell a story about that.
Yes,
So
please do.
I
Yeah.
was so I was teaching like English, and every Friday was story day, and I brought a story to class which I thought was really nice, and it's called like it's about Christ, but it's about him being a king
Mm-hmm.
and a loving king. And I did a whole like introduction about the story, and I was apologizing to my Muslim learners, like, I'm so sorry, it's about Jesus Christ. I know Jesus Christ is a prophet in your religion. And then one Muslim boy raised his hand and he said, "Ma'am, magkwento ka na lang po."
Okay.
Ma'am, just tell the story.
Yeah.
But and the point is, if that story is good, it's going to be good,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so while I have to consider the context and I have to respect like the context of my students, I also have it shouldn't come from me like to make things like about the differences, but I want to also maximize and take advantage of similarities. Like for example, I have to be mindful that similar what's similar. For example, everybody loves stories. That's similar.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to take advantage of that, right? But I have to take note of differences as well. Like how would they take it? So that would come in later. But like
Mm-hmm.
what the Muslim boy reminded me was like, ma'am, all of us we love stories. So just let us listen to this story. So it's that kind of like a balance between knowing the similarities among your students and the differences and working with them. So in a way, like it's I take my cues from them as well,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and that's how I learn to be better at juggling like uh, the differences and minding them. In terms of inclusion, it's really important that um, that you integrate it in the lessons, like the concepts that can empower them, especially those come from very poor families,
Mm-hmm.
and then incorporate it in routines in class. So, for example, in my class, we always have a goal, and
Mm-hmm.
that goal is lahat gagaling. Lahat
Mm-hmm.
meaning everybody achieves or everybody becomes excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because I don't want anybody being left behind.
That's
And if
nice.
it's lahat and we establish that as a culture, then we are accountable for one another. And that's the kind of Filipinos I want to raise in my classroom. That we shouldn't rest until our fellow Filipinos are okay. So in my class, we always look out for each other. Like, okay, this kid is struggling because he was working in the morning to help his parents. So what do we do when our classmate struggles,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because lahat gagaling dapat.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our mindset. And so we always say like, what's an excellent person for us in the classroom? So I would always ask that thing, what's an excellent person? An excellent person is somebody who can make other people excellent. If you
Mm-hmm.
can make another person excellent, then you're an excellent person. So
Mm-hmm.
being smart, if you know how to use your smarts to help another person, then you're being an excellent person. So that's the kind of thing, because I know like I as a teacher, we all know that we don't know the future. We're not like future. We have no insight like, oh, everybody will finish college. I and being a teacher of like poor students, I know that most of them or some of them wouldn't even go to college.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Mm-hmm.
can always teach them to look out for one another
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to like use their. So aside from that, I really incorporate like um teaching how to learn rather than what to learn,
Hmm.
because I have to equip my students with discarte. You know what discarte, Miss Alpha, means, right?
Yeah.
So discarte is like how you try to solve your own problems. How are you creative about going through the challenges in life? That's your discarte. And because most of my students are poor, then I have to teach them strategies to learn, so that even if they don't continue to go to school, they would find ways to learn in whatever they're doing. If they're just doing, side jobs. But if you are good at learning, then you can rise the ranks and become like a supervisor eventually, right? So that's what I hope to do. Like, so I I also use like whole brain teaching to be able to do that. So we have a routine called Teach OK. So
Okay.
we teach until everybody's okay. So that's linked to the goal of lahat gagaling.
Mm.
Sorry, this is taking a lot of story time, but just for you to imagine like how it happens in my class. So after I teach the lesson, they would have to teach one another, and that wakes
Okay.
up your brain, because scientists say that if you're able to teach another person, that means you've learned it. So I'm using the strategies of peer teaching, whole brain
Mm.
teaching, and also like the social emotional learning of taking care of one another all in one routine. So that's, I guess you can say, like, if you're a teacher, it's really good that you learn different strategies, and like I really want to be evidence based. So I do research different strategies to help my students learn.
Oh, that's pretty good. I can only imagine how you embed all of these different strategies in your classroom. But what I truly love is how you teach your students how to look out for one another. And I'm curious, are there like specific strategies or tips or lessons that you actually teach the students how to look out for each other? Or is it just, you teach as the moments arise?
Um, so like what I said, like what I shared before, one strategy is teach okay.
Okay, teach.
So
Mm-hmm.
so they have to, after I teach a lesson,
Mm-hmm.
they teach one another. So I say teach, and then they say okay, and then they face each other. And we would have to make sure that your partner really learned the lesson. So you have to quiz your partner, or if you're the one confused about the lesson, then you have to have the humility to ask your partner to teach you. So that's how we help one another. And really, it raises the scores of my students. So I do that before I do the quiz, or like I do an activity just for them, just for the lesson to be reinforced, number one, but also to make sure that they're helping one another.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about it is that they find different ways of teaching one another.
Mm.
So it's not just quizzing. Some of the kids would make like paper games, which they hand to their partners, and the partners would answer, or they play games like guessing games. So
Mm-hmm.
they become really creative on what I was talking about, how to learn. So
Mm-hmm.
so there are three things. So this is what I read about in research. There are three things that raises in intrinsic motivation. One is a sense of competence. So the
Mm-hmm.
students should feel that they can do it. So that's what Teach OK does. It
Good.
raises your
Yeah.
confidence about like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning. I know. And then second is a sense of autonomy, like they have
Mm-hmm.
a choice in the matter. And what the Teach OK does is that it gives them a choice of how to review their lessons, right? And then the
Mm-hmm.
third one is a sense of belonging,
Mm-hmm.
that in the process, they feel that they are being supported. Even if they make mistakes, somebody will help them and guide them to find the right answer, and they're still accepted. They will not be rejected if they make mistakes, because it's that kind of environment where the goal is lahat gagaling, and we use Teach OK to supplement that, to support that. So it builds the intrinsic motivation of the child, but also increases like the capacity for learning. So that's one of the strategies I can share, because I've been doing it for years and I've seen how it works.
That's great. Is Teach OK a curriculum or is it just a strategy?
It's a strategy. I learned
Yeah.
it from whole brain teaching.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Yeah. This is wonderful. I love how the students get to teach their peers, which is the application of the skills that they've learned, which then, measures their understanding of the lesson. Yeah, that's great. All right. So, what are the barriers that you see in teaching at an economically disadvantaged area?
So the hardest thing about uh, teaching uh, in high poverty areas, or
Mm-hmm.
in a school that has a high incidence of poverty, is that you have no sense of control. Like, you
Okay.
have a very small locus of control in terms of your students' context. If it's just teaching, it's easy, right? Madali
Mm-hmm.
lang kung magtuturo ka na lang eh, at hindi mo
Mm-hmm.
naisipin yung konteksto. But
Mm-hmm.
if you have to think that your students are hungry when they come to school, that sometimes they don't come to school because they don't have money for fare, um, or they're sleeping in class because they had to work in the morning before coming to school, or they've been abused at home.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have no control over that.
So what do you
But
do? Yeah, in terms of those students, how do you still engage them?
so actually, my dream,
Mm-hmm.
because all of this information are being presented to us as teachers. And the
Yeah.
question is, what do you do with all of this
Mm-hmm.
information? So the school is really a hub of information of Filipino families. Like what's happening in Filipino families, we would know, because those are the contexts that influence and affect our students as they learn. And while my concern is for students to learn, I cannot ignore the context. And that's what I
Right.
would always say. Context affects learning, and we have to address context to be able to raise learning outcomes. And so, what we have to do is to go out of school also and to really partner with groups that can help us address the context. Because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, um, learning wouldn't happen, because the context would always be there affecting, my students. If my students are coming in school hungry, and I don't address that, I still teach, even if I teach different ways, I read research, I apply it, etc., etc. But my kid is still hungry. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, right? It wouldn't be as effective. So what do we do? So we partner. So for example, in schools, we have feeding programs to address the hunger. But
Great.
also, we have to strengthen the other initiatives that influence, the other things. So we partner with, for example, for this pandemic, we partner with mental health advocates to help us
Mm-hmm.
with, you know, um, helping the child cope. We partner with the barangay to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that students are safe. We partner with, so etc. So it's really making sure that structures are in place,
Mm-hmm.
uh, so that there's support to
Mm-hmm.
address the context.
That's great. How about their parents? How do
So
you
the
engage the parents in the process of, their child's education?
um, parents are very tricky because they have siguro, what can I say, nakasanayan. Like they
Okay.
got so used to like how things are. It's really hard to change perspectives for a year, parang, and I interact more with students than with parents, right? But we see like how the parents influence. So in terms of parent engagement, number one, the PTA or the Parent Teacher Association is key.
Mhm.
Because if you partner with them, you also get insights on how parents think, what are their concerns, and then you can address it structurally. So, like you put up structures for support for parents, or through partnerships, or through like discussions with them. So,
Mhm.
like direct discussions with the parents. In terms of like classroom parents, we have to be transparent with them and also ask for their help and support from the very beginning. Like, uh, I would like in my class, I held an orientation at the beginning of the school year to say these are my expectations of what their roles are, what my role is, especially this pandemic because it's changed.
That's
But this
right.
is right. So this is also the kind of support I can give the parents. This is what they can expect from me. So it should be clear.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it doesn't mean that you've been like some parents in the Philippines, so some families, they have like 10 kids. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean you have 10 kids, you already know how to be an effective parent. And that came from them. Like one parent shared that with me. Ay, parang, ma'am, 10 na anak ko, pero hindi ibig sabihin, alam ko na yung gagawin.
Tama. Yeah.
So, the role of the school is to actually also guide them as partners because at the end of the day, it's still the kid, parang we have to think about the children. So, yun yung point of contact and the point of conversation na dapat pinag-uusapan natin pareho.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. To make parents start partners in their child's education. I love it. Okay. Switch naman tayo, Teacher Sab, when it comes to advice that you could give to educators and school principals. Actually, before you answer that question, I'm curious. You've been in the public school setting for 13 years. Why haven't you become an administrator? Is there a reason why?
Uh, well, I've I've thought about it.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I think like sometimes you would imagine like, oh, if I can work on this, maybe I have more power to change stuff as an administrator. But the thing is, I would always go back to what's life giving for me, what I can do. The three things I've said earlier: passion, skill,
Mm-hmm.
and need. Where am I needed most? What's life giving for me is still being in front of my students. So no matter how tired I am,
Yeah.
and I had to drag myself to school, but when I stand in front of my students, that's like I'm in a trance, and that gives me a lot of energy. So that's what I mean when I say it's really life giving. But afterwards, when I'm out of the classroom, I'm like, that I was drained. But when you're in front of them, like you're just in the moment. So I know that's something that I cannot let go of, because when you're an administrator, you're not teaching, and you're faced with like a lot of reports, a lot of problems. But and also my skill is really teaching. So why take out good teachers from the classroom? So
Mm.
what I'm advocating for is a better career pathway for teachers who want to remain teachers, but also want to rise up the ladder. So that's what I've been trying to like push for
All
in
right.
terms of policies.
Keep that thought, Teacher Sab, because I want to hear more in terms of what you are doing for our teachers in the Philippines and your advocacy when it comes to policies regarding that. So, why don't we take about 5 minutes of a break? And then when we come back, let's talk about that. All right? Okay. I'll see you in 5 minutes. TNC is a live stream platform of online shows for people on the go. Please watch all our shows as seen on the screen. Imagine having your own show, your own playlist, your own content, but we make it easier for you. TNC aims to transform the lives of our viewers through engaging, authentic, and original content. Our vision is to become a global 24 over 7 live stream channel that showcases Filipino talent, global influencers, cultural intelligence, and ingenuity. Please continue to watch and support Once a Teacher, Always a Teacher on selected Saturdays. You can watch live or on replay via Facebook or YouTube. You can also follow us on Instagram. You can also listen to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts simply by searching hashtag TNCNow. For sponsorships, please email now at thenewchannel.com or send us a DM. Enjoy these life changing shows because we made them for you. All right, folks, welcome back. All right, I'm hoping that you are all feeling inspired and are taking down notes from what Teacher Sab has been sharing with us the past 30 minutes. It's amazing how a public school teacher is really, really making a difference in the lives of her students. And now, because of her service with the students, she can help, or she is helping in the systemic reform of public ed in the Philippines. And I think that's where we left off. Teacher Sab had mentioned about her vision and her hopes in terms of strengthening the support for teacher development. So why don't we continue the conversation with Teacher Sab? Teacher Sab, are you there?
Yes,
All
hi
right,
Natasha.
there you go. Welcome back. Welcome back. All right, so we left off with that conversation in terms of your beautiful hope and your vision in terms of supporting teacher development capacity. Tell us about that.
So actually, my um, for graduate school, I studied teacher empowerment. So
Okay.
it's actually educational leadership, and
Mhm.
I wanted to focus on the teacher empowerment, and I realized that teachers are always part of reforms, but they're at the tail end. So we
Yes.
have no say, like what goes on at the very beginning. So we have no ownership of reforms
Mm,
because we're at the end. So it becomes more like a compliance for us
mm,
rather than like we understand why this is important. And as much as possible, I really advocate for teacher voice in policies. And for 3 years, I worked with the central office um, to work on policies for school effectiveness while also teaching in the public school. So what I tried to like really put in how they do policies to consult with teachers and school heads before making any policies that are related to school. So I worked with the school effectiveness division, and
mhm.
that was a new office when I came in, and that's how we tried to create policies for school effect. We formed an ad hoc committee of teachers, school heads, people from the field and the ground, uh, so that they are able to talk about the topics that, and concerns that they have in terms of the policies we want to push for. And so now it's more grounded. And I hope that stays the same, for the next years.
That's great because our teachers need that. I think because the teachers are in the groundwork, they know the issues and they need to have a voice, right? I don't know whether you're seeing it from the policy perspective, but it seems like most of the policies are being written from up here without the practical consideration of how it's going to be implemented down here to the ground, right?
Yeah, I agree. And also, there's an implementation gap because teachers are not
Mm,
being asked
mm,
for like
yes.
what concerns they will encounter when it's being downloaded to us. So that's really important to consider as you make policies from. But I also have to like um, honor the people who create policies, from the central office because it's not an easy thing to do,
Mm,
and it's really scary to think about like what will be good for all schools in the Philippines. It's really
mhm,
scary because that would influence how things are being done. So it's a
yes.
big responsibility. It's like trying to make an elephant dance.
Mhm.
So
That's
yeah.
right. All right. I'm curious. You're very young, teacher Sab, and you managed to stay in the public school for 13 years. That's an amazing achievement. Yeah, I say that that's an amazing achievement because most of the new teachers who enter, the education field don't last in their first 3 years. So after being in the public school setting or in the education field for 3 years, they leave. They seek out other fields, right? So I am curious, how do you manage to stay in the education field and what keeps you going?
That's that's a common question, or that's a usual question we have to ask ourselves, every
Mm-hmm.
year. Why would you say yes again to teaching, especially in the public school? But one, you have to always go back to your why. That's why it should be clear to you why you're entering the profession in the first place, because
Mm-hmm.
that's what you will hold on to when things get, messy and hard. And I would always say that for in Filipino language, no, isang letra lang ang pagitan ng pinili at pinilit.
Oh,
'Di ba?
okay.
Parang, yeah, if you put it, it's actually your choice, pinili mo. No, you chose this. But when things are difficult and there's a cross already, like a T, right? Then
Mm-hmm.
it feels like you're pinilit na lang.
Mm-hmm.
So when things are difficult, you feel like you're being, parang you lack a sense of control or something. Find out the reason why you feel that you're being forced into this when in fact you actually chose to be in this. So find that what's the factor that's making you want to leave. And is that factor enough reason for you to leave? Is it a temporary thing? If it's just you're too tired, then rest, right? Maybe when you're well rested, you would think differently. So, go back to your why and look at the factors that's influencing you to rethink this profession. Because at the end of the day, we it's a good profession to be in. Just imagine that, the power of a teacher is that we influence lives of
Mm-hmm.
students, right? So I would always remember like you carry the dreams of young Filipinos with you. And
Mm-hmm.
that's an honor and a challenge. And you have to take that seriously. So it's heavy, yes, but is it worth it? Yes. So you stick to that, if it's still worth it for you. And another thing is, during prayers, there was one time that God reminded me that why I'm really here. He said, Sab, like in prayer, it came
Mm-hmm.
like as an answer that, Sab, I didn't call you to teach. I called you to love. And that's the point. Teaching is my form of loving. So just remember, when you're facing difficulties, what's the loving thing to do? Because at the end of the day, that's what you're called to be. And to do is to love. If it's you're finding difficult to love your students, what's the loving thing to do at this moment? If you're finding it difficult to love your school head, your co-teachers, what's the
Yeah.
loving thing to do? Because at the end of the day, teaching is just one form of loving. So we go back to that, it's really like at the core of it.
Mhm. Um, One question that I have in mind right now is, how do you foster that love? Natututunan ba ang magmahal sa profession na to? Can you learn how to love this profession? What
Yes,
do
of
you teachers
course.
have?
um, I know that a lot of teachers didn't choose teaching um, because they really want to teach. Like some of them were forced into this. They didn't have. I know people didn't have enough money. This is the cheapest course. Just real talk.
Yes.
Um, and then second, parang they were just forced by their parents, or it's the easiest course to get into college. So many reasons, for them to be in this profession. But at the course of teaching, it's hard to not fall in love with it, especially if you see students grow and develop in front of your eyes. Like at the end of the year, you see how different they are from when they came to your classroom. You see how much they've improved, or like when they hug you and thank you, like that makes it worth it. It's hard to not say that you don't love teaching. And I like nga that this shows parang once a teacher, always a teacher, because you bring that, you know, honor and nobility and love for the profession everywhere you go. Right? You'd always be, I'm a teacher. We're so proud to say that, diba? Not just during Teachers Month, but whenever you're asked, what's your work? What do you do? I'm a teacher, and there's like pride in that, diba? So for me, parang how do you cultivate that love? You look for the grace in every day. What Even in the most difficult days, there would always be grace, and be grateful for that. And that's how you build your resilience as a teacher and as a person, like in general. Diba?
Oh, I love it. Grace and gratitude. That's amazing. That's a great formula to get through a tough day in school.
Yeah.
Yeah. A teacher Sab, any insights for school leaders? You've seen the way I see you, and the way, I understand your work is that you are a practitioner, but at the same time, you consult, and then you also manage to inform and help in terms of the policy reform in the Philippines. So you see it from here all the way up there. So, what any insights or tips that you can share to school leaders?
Yeah. I'm actually very grateful for that kind of perspective because it doesn't come so easily, right?
Mhm.
So coming from that perspective where I see like from the top and the bottom and the middle,
Right.
it's important like as school leaders to not just focus on achievement, like scores, but I'd go back to what I said earlier that we have to address the context because context affects teaching and learning. Learn, get to know your students better, get to know your teachers better, because their context should affect and influence the structures, the policies, the processes that you do in school.
Mhm.
Because that would, even though that's indirect, it has a major effect on learning outcomes. So we can't raise academic outcomes if students and teachers are struggling with mental health, for example, or are facing challenges. Um, and we don't address that, then, we're not being, we're, that would definitely influence like the achievement that we want to happen in school. So there, parang as leaders, it's really important to have the kind of empathy and being grounded on context to be able to improve our schools.
That's wonderful to hear. And lastly, Teacher Sab, if you have any of your students who are watching right now, and to any of the students out there who may be feeling not at their best right now, but still have hopes and dreams and desires. Can we hear a message from you to inspire them?
Just remember that you can change dreams. You can put down dreams if you think it's not working for you and pick up another dream as long as you're holding on to some dream, you know? Um, and in Filipino, there's a word called pag-asam,
Mm.
desire, and go back to what you really desire for yourself, for your family. Imagine that kind of life that you want. And that's your pag-asam. But remember, inside the word pag-asam, there's the word pag-asa. Because inside those desires, that's where our hope lies. You continue to hope because you desire for a better life. So don't let go of the things that you desire because that will keep you going and that will motivate you to continue. When you forget, make physical reminders, put it on your wall, put it on your phone, just to remind you of ano yung pag-asam mo so that you continue to hope and fight for that. You know? So yun lang, parang nandito tayo, no, magtutulungan tayo for that to happen.
Wow. Thank you, Teacher Sab. What an inspiring hour with you today. And we thank you so much for gracing our episode. Madami akong natutunan, Teacher Sab. As an educator
Thank
and a
you.
school leader, I continue to be inspired by your almost poetic words. I love um, when you said pinili versus pinilit, right? And then what you just said, pag-asam, pag-asa. And I wish there's a better way for me to translate it in English, but those poetic Filipino terms just gets to the core of all of these things. So for this, Teacher Sab, I thank you so much for this wonderful time. I wish you lots of good luck and strength to continue keeping on in terms of your advocacy for public education, for teachers, for students who are economically disadvantaged, and for all diverse learners. So, thank you again, Teacher Sab. And for those who have not watched Teacher Sub's TEDx talks, I encourage you to please watch them. In 2013, just like what I mentioned, she talked about the return on investment. And recently, she has a few other TED Talks that you may want to check out. All right. And I know Teacher Sub is not really active in social media. So
Yes.
unfortunately, you may not be able to catch her on social media, but you will be able to catch up when it comes to, her talks and her influence when it comes to policy in public ed. All right, Teacher Sab, thank you very much. Again, I appreciate you and I appreciate everything that you do for the Philippine public education.
Thank you also, Miss Alpha, for inviting me here. And, I had fun having this conversation. So thank you also.
Thank you. With that, viewers around the world, in the Philippines, here, I thank you and I will see you next week. Bye for now.